Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Sowing Seeds Neurosurgery. My name is Raquel White. I'm a current student research fellow at the University of Rochester School of Medicine and Dentistry between years 3 and 4, and I'll be serving as your host this evening. I currently serve as the Specialty Interest Group Liaison for Neurology and Neurosurgery for the SNMA, and I just want to welcome you all to the start of the specialty series of neurosurgery. So this series is part of our Sowing Seeds program created by our national president, Asuse Obo, in collaboration with the Alumni and Multicultural Affairs National Committee. Throughout this year-long program, we will provide resources on how to succeed as a pre-med and medical student, and we'll touch on everything from financial literacy to preparing for board exams and more. So, make sure you are a national member by visiting snma.org and signing up to get in the know. Okay, now we'll introduce our panelists. We have Dr. Nathan Nair. He's the residency program director at MedStar at Georgetown University. Hello, good evening, Dr. Nair.
Hello, how are you?
Good, and you?
Good.
We also have Dr. Islam Fayed, a neurosurgery resident of PGY6, also at MedStar at Georgetown University. Good evening, Dr. Fayed.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for having me.
Welcome. We also have Dr. Danny Terrell, a neurosurgery resident, PGY3 at Louisiana State University. Welcome, Dr. Terrell.
Hey, nice to be here.
Good having you. Then we have Dr. David Paul, neurosurgery resident at the University of Rochester Medical Center, PGY5. Good evening, Dr. Paul.
Good evening. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Then we have Dr. Jason McGowan, an attending physician in Denver, Colorado. Good evening, Dr. McGowan.
Good evening.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. First, we'll start off with the panelists just sharing a bit of your personal story. I don't know if you guys have a preference in how you'd like to start, but some of the questions that we'd like you guys to answer are talking about like, where you started, where did you attend medical school, and where you are now. Why did you choose neurosurgery, and how did you find mentors in the field? We'll start with those questions. Is there anyone who would like to go first, or do I need to pick someone? Okay, Dr. Danny Terrell. Could you just share?
How did I know I was going to get picked? So I'm Danny Terrell. I am originally from Tennessee. You can probably see behind me. That's my license plate from my home. I went to med school at Loyola University in Chicago. And then now I'm at LSU Shreveport for residency training. I think, probably like most people, or maybe a good bit of people, a good majority of folks, when I was in undergrad, I really liked neuroscience and just, neuro-related things, and took classes in that area. But going to med school, you kind of, there's a big jump from that to the clinical practice of medicine in the neurological disciplines. And so I had to figure out, when I got to med school, I was like, oh, do I want to do neurology? Do I want to do neurosurgery? And I was able to hook up with people in SNMA, actually, some deans at my school, and told them I was interested in trying to figure out which path. And they actually hooked me up with some good mentors at my school to follow around and be with. We had those like clinical immersion programs as part of second year, and I actually was assigned to neurosurgery, which was good for me. And so I spent time on neurology. I hated it, honestly. And I felt when I spent time on neurosurgery, I was just so excited, so fascinated. And that's what I ultimately decided on after a lot of consideration. So that's how I picked it. And some of those mentors that I had at Loyola helped me kind of get from med school to residency. And I think one thing that's important for med students, and I guess even in residency, is to identify mentors that have been where you're trying to go and can help you get to the next place. So I still talk to the mentors I have from med school. Some of them are obviously neurosurgeon mentors, but some of them are in other disciplines as well, because, you need mentors for different facets of your career. And then now here at LSU, I definitely have some awesome mentors, people that, you just get along with, and that also kind of have similar career paths that you're interested in, who are willing and able to help shepherd you to your endpoint.
Okay, thank you. And I forgot to add, what's your favorite thing about the field of neurosurgery?
Probably my favorite thing, I think one of the things that made me choose this is it's such a broad field. It's never, your day doesn't have to be the same thing every single day unless you want it to be, which I don't. So you can be a specialist in neurosurgery and still kind of also be a generalist. And a lot of other fields, especially now, are not like that. Some places in neurosurgery, you can be super specialized and only do one thing, but I really like the fact that it's so broad and you can do so many different things to kind of help people.
Okay, thank you. Before our next panelist responds to those questions, should anyone in the audience have any questions, you could jot them down in the comment section and we'll get to them at the end. So who wants to answer next? Dr. Fayed?
Sure, I can go next. So my name is Islam. I grew up in New Jersey. I went to college up at Dartmouth, and then med school at Georgetown in DC, and then stayed there for residency. I'm currently a PGY6. In terms of why I picked neurosurgery, I think I developed an interest in the neurosciences, much like Danny was saying, pretty early on. For me, is because my father has MS, so that kind of helped me develop that interest very early. And initially, I thought I was going to neurology as well, but going through the third year, like clinical rotations specifically, that helped me realize I was more interested in the surgical specialties and the more medical specialties. And that's one of the main decisions that third year med students make early on in deciding what specialty they're doing. So for me, that interest in the neurosciences combined with my interest in the surgical specialties made neurosurgery the choice for me. And in terms of finding good mentors, I think as you go on and learn what you're interested in, I think it's important to reach out to the people that you're working with who are in that field. Early on in medical school, it could be your professors, from the basic science classes, and then going on to the clinical years, it's reaching out to the residents and faculty that are in those specialties. And for me, the residents at Georgetown were incredibly supportive and helpful in helping me figure out what to do and how to do it well in terms of succeeding in this field. And then the faculty, of course, have tons of wisdom and experience that they can share with you. But you just have to reach out to them, and more often than not, they'll be very willing to help you out.
Okay, Dr. Paul?
Yeah, I'd be happy to go next. So I'm David Paul. I'm originally from Grand Rapids, Michigan. I went to undergrad in West Michigan at a small school called Hope College, and then I somehow found my way to the University of Rochester for medical school. Actually, being close to home was important to me, and it's interesting because when I looked at a map, honestly, of all the Great Lakes, and I only applied to medical schools that were on the Great Lakes, and Rochester was one of the highest ranked schools on my list that I was accepted to, so it was kind of a no-brainer. As far as my interest in neurosurgery, really kind of started when I was young. I think it's a little cliche, but a lot of African-American, Black and brown residents, neurosurgeons were introduced to neurosurgery through the book Good Hands. And that's the book that I read as a kid that my parents put in my hands and sat me down and said, hey, you need to read this. And it really opened my eyes. And I think as a kid, I was just like, hey, why are you, making me read this book? This is crazy. But as I grew older, I realized that they were exposing me to things that, I may not have seen on an everyday basis. And so that seed was planted in me from an early age, even though I didn't necessarily realize that that's fully what I wanted to do until later. In college, I was on the pre-med track. I sought out mentors early, and I actually had the opportunity to shadow in college. And I got in on the surgery. It was a surgery that was focused on the brainstem. Actually, it was a patient who had a tumor on one of the nerves. It's a nerve that actually affects the function of your sensation and function of your face. And they get really sharp pains, and almost to the point where they want to commit suicide. And I saw a neurosurgeon go in and do a small, incision back here, and go down under the microscope. And I saw the brainstem and the nerves, and it was like one of those light bulb moments, and aha moments. There's nothing else in the world that I could ever see myself doing or whatever want to do. So I kind of went into medical school with that sense of focus, obviously trying to figure out other things that I was interested in. And I sort of latched on to the neurosurgery department. I found a mentor there who really kind of pushed me. And the first thing he told me to do was to figure out everything else I wanted to do first. So he said, if you can find something other than neurosurgery to do, you should do that and avoid neurosurgery at all costs. He really tried to push me away from choosing neurosurgery. And, I went through the normal routine of medical school. I ended up doing some research because I found neuroscience fascinating. And when I got to the clinical years, I went through all the rotations, and I really approached every rotation as if, if I could fall in love with this rotation, I'm going to do this instead of neurosurgery. And, especially when it came around, I actually got nervous because when I was on my neurology rotation, as others have said, I really didn't like neurology. I didn't feel at home. And I thought, I should really like the neurosciences, but it was something inside of me that said, hey, the medicine aspect of things may not necessarily be what you're really driven to and passionate about. It's more so the hands-on and the application of all of these sorts of things. And so that's sort of how I found my way into proving to myself that neurosurgery was exactly what I wanted to do. And, obviously, like everybody else, you go through that process of applying to residency and doing STEP and all of those sorts of things. And we can answer questions about that along the way. But I think the key thing is that I got plugged in with mentors. I found some people who really believed in me, but also challenged me to look at the whole picture and not to be so one-minded and one track focused. So that way, once I made up my mind, I knew that it was something that, was my dream and not necessarily someone else's dream that I was chasing after. I would say that, one of my favorite things about neurosurgery, again, is the varied disciplines. And again, the fact that we take care of some of the sickest patients, and you can do a simple, spine surgery that, you could it's like riding a bike, and it's just, it's like a refreshing case to do. But then, there are just the very extreme cases that really require a lot of mental effort, a lot of stamina. And so it's just that broad range of taking care of really sick patients, taking care of simple patients, and looking after the full spectrum of neurologic disease from the brain to the spine is, to me, fascinating. And so I actually have an interesting journey in doing an enfolded fellowship in neurocritical care as well. And I'm, can answer questions to that towards the end, but I don't want to take up any more time than I'm allotted for this spot.
Thank you for sharing, Dr. Paul. Dr. McGowan, would you like to share your story?
Sure. So my name is Jason McGowan, grew up in St. Louis, went to undergrad at Morehouse College in Atlanta, then went to DC for medical school, Georgetown, and stayed on as a resident there as well. I would say that my journey to neurosurgery is slightly different than those that have expressed theirs before, in the sense that I knew I had a passion for medicine. And I think one of the first decisions you make when selecting a field within medicine is determining, do you want to be in the medicine wing or do you want to be in the surgical wing? And I think for me, it was a quick decision that I was very interested in surgery and some of the surgical subspecialties. My first exposure to medicine was in high school. I shadowed a cardiothoracic surgeon and sort of instantly fell in love with the attention to detail and the technical acumen that it requires to do that successfully. And as a result of that, I pursued a major in biology with pre-med focus. On my first day of medical school, I was still in that curriculum where each individual class had its own time slot. So gross anatomy was our first class of medical school. Got a lecture from an orthopedic spine surgeon and sort of changed my whole perception of what I wanted to do. And I fell in love with the concept of spine. I knew that one of the other passions I had beside medicine was architecture, and it sort of married both of those things, right? Medicine and architecture, where you have something that's structurally and biomechanically sound, but also has to be mobile and dynamic to allow us to be human beings. So I pursued orthopedics sort of full steam. I did research my first year. I did research in the summertime. I did research during my second year, sat for STEP, and then I went into my clinical rotations with a focus primarily on orthopedics. And I did my orthopedic rotation in the fall of my third year, so sort of fall winter block. And just as those that have come before me sort of expressed about neurology, there was a disconnect. And I recognized that, you know, hips and knees seemed okay, but foot and ankle wasn't my thing. Anything above the waist really wasn't my thing. And when you think about spending 5 years in a residency program where you may do 3 to 6 months of spine, it just seemed like I was sort of barking up the wrong tree. Fortunately, I scheduled neurosurgery to follow orthopedics, and I knew that, you know, everybody was super excited to see the brain, and I was like, look, I'm going to do these spine cases, get my exposure there. It's going to be great. And I fell in love with the field almost instantly. And the real reason, and I'm glad that Dr. Nair is on this this conversation as well, is he gives the advice, don't fall in love with the residents that you work with because they come and go. You have to make sure it's the field that you fall in love with. But what I will tell you is that the residents within the neurosurgical program at Georgetown challenged me in a way that I hadn't been challenged by residents in other subspecialties. And the content itself really connected with me. And this sort of segues into what helped me choose neurosurgery. And to me, the best thing that I can say about neurosurgery is that choosing neurosurgery doesn't mean giving up the rest. And what I mean by that is you have to do radiology. When you tell someone they have a diagnosis that's going to change their life, you're doing psychiatry. When you see, you know, tumors that affect the pituitary, you're doing endocrinology. When you're doing, when you see patients that have METs from other places, there's an oncologic component to this. There's a trauma component to it. There's critical care, as I think it's David was just before me said. So, you know, it's one of the few fields where you can practice almost the entire scope of medicine, but then you get to hone everything that's in you and focus on one patient when you enter their operating room, and you have some of the best technology, the best equipment, and it requires the most defined and refined set of skills that I think you need to complete any type of surgical procedure. So to me, it's sort of, it allows you to not only practice all the medicine that, you know, you loved going into medical school, but then you can also focus in on the specific patient and focus your entire energy towards helping them get better.
Thank you, Dr. McGowan. That's a very good point that you made, where you said that we should fall in love with the medicine and not just the residents, because I think as third years, as you're going through the different rotations, it's easy to get caught up in the people that you're around and not necessarily focusing in on what the medicine or the practice that you will be seeing. So thank you for that. Dr. Nair, would you like to share?
Sure. Having heard everyone else speak, I think for some reason it sounds like everyone did neurology and wanted to be a neurologist and then hated it. And I was in a very similar place. I actually started medical school, though, having had time doing research in neurovascular research as an undergraduate. And that experience made me certain I was not going to do neurosurgery. So I went to medical school at Columbia, certain I was going to do neurology, 100%. And then I did the rotation, and I just hated it. I could not see myself living that life for the rest of my life. And then I did surgery, and I really enjoyed surgery. And neurosurgery is what married those two together, but I was still uncertain. So I actually took a year off, did more research in neurosurgery to kind of prove to myself that it wasn't what I wanted to do. And it turned out I proved to myself it was what I wanted to do. And so that was sort of my journey, which sounds very similar to everyone else's journey in many respects. It's kind of figuring out that through a process of elimination that neurosurgery is the right field for you. And then along the lines of what Dr. McGowan said about not falling in love with residents, that I firmly believe that that you shouldn't choose a specialty just because you love the residents, because the residents will change. I actually think the counterfactual to that is probably more important. I think you should not choose to not do a residency in neurosurgery because you don't like the residents or you don't feel comfortable in that particular situation with those residents, because I think you'll find your family as you go through this, and finding great mentors is part of that. But I think sometimes people steer clear of neurosurgery because they don't think they'll like the people. And I think that sometimes leads people down the wrong path. And then for me, what I love about neurosurgery, and this probably applies to surgical fields across the board, but I love the neurosciences. So specifically, it is the fact that an action you take, you see a very immediate reaction. Hopefully, in general, most times it's for the best. It's patients doing well, but it also sometimes ends up with a complication. But you see the results immediately, and it's that immediacy, that immediate gratification, if you will, that I think is part of why I love the field. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nair. And as we have heard from all of our panelists thus far, is that mentoring is something that's huge, that is beneficial to everyone, whether you're a pre-med or a medical student, and finding the best mentors will eventually help guide us as we go through deciding what it is that we'd like to do for our careers, and also taking the time to evaluate each rotation that we go through and each specialty to see where we find our niche as well. So what we'll do now, we'll transition into some questions. We can start with some questions for our residents, since we have 3 residents here. The question that we have is, how was the transition from being a medical student to a neurosurgery resident? So that's part A. And part B, what are some things that you've learned about yourself over the course of that transition? So I know I started with Dr. Terrell first, so I'll switch it up and start with Dr. Paul. So how was the transition between school and resident?
So I think this is probably going to be different based upon the cultures at different institutions. I would say the biggest jump is taking personal responsibility for the patients and, showing up and being expected to know something. But beyond that, which is obvious, I thought that one of the huge things for me was just I felt like it opened up an ability to just be myself. When you're on your 3rd year clerkships and rotations, you're constantly being, criticized. You're constantly, and again, it's true for residency, but I think you have a lot more freedom in residency. And the scrutiny is different in residency. And I felt as if I had the opportunity to really sort of live into my personality, live into, who I am, and just kind of just be me and just do me. And I thought that was really great to kind of have some of the training wheels taken off. And I think it improved a lot of my, sort of my interactions with everybody. And I think it was really awesome. Now, I think that, with that comes, some other, points of conversation, but I don't want to take the time, like I said, from everyone else.
Dr. Fayed?
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think the responsibility aspect of it is probably the biggest thing. Is that you go from being a medical student that's just kind of passing through each rotation to becoming part of that specialty, and you become directly responsible for the patients that you're taking care of. So that comes with a lot of added stress, but it also carries with it a certain amount of respect that you get from your colleagues. So you learn and you grow. You learn how to manage the stress that comes with managing a busy service. I know for us at Georgetown, you kind of jump right in and are a key part of the neurosurgical service at the university hospital. So you learn very quickly. You learn how to become efficient, and then you learn things about yourself as well. You learn what works for you. You learn what's important for yourself outside of work, because then the limited amount of time that you have outside of work, you kind of prioritize things that are important to you. So I think that especially that first year of residency, you learn and grow very quickly as a result of that responsibility and stress that's given to you. But then it also becomes very, very rewarding as you grow and mature.
Thank you. And Dr. Terrell?
Yeah, so the first part of the question is, how is the transition from med school to residency? What was the second part of the question, Raquel?
And what are some things that you learned about yourself over the course of the years?
Gotcha. I think the transition for me personally wasn't that bad. I mean, and I think I would attribute that because I went to a really good medical school and I didn't appreciate how great our clinical education was at the time. Going through all these, we did a lot of medicine at my med school. We did a lot of ICU, and did a lot of rotations, like all the way to the end. And then as a senior med student, you kind of get annoyed by that kind of stuff. You're like, I just want to do neurosurgery only once I've made that decision. But we were forced to do a lot of medicine, and that made me a really good medicine doctor. So when I became a resident, I think that part of it wasn't so overwhelming in terms of how to take care of patients. It definitely is a different pace, a lot more patients, obviously, to take care of, and a lot higher acuity patients. I think the biggest transition was, learning how you kind of move from a different, as a med student, you kind of work at the hospital, but it's a different environment. And then you're having to learn how to build relationships, working relationships with the ICU, with the OR, with the clinic, with the patient, and you're doing it while you're very stressed and or tired. So you have to kind of develop your own interpersonal skills and develop some internal kind of boundaries that you place on yourself and that you place on your work. I think the first 2 years, like looking back, I'm a third year now, looking back on it, it's kind of like a blur. Time gets warped and things get kind of strange. And so that was something that's very different that I think I really didn't expect. I thought it was going to be like just a continuation of clinical stuff in med school, but it's definitely the highs and lows of it being on a university service, like level 1 trauma service, where you're doing a lot and you're very busy, can definitely show you your personality a little bit better. It's a really good mirror for who you are and gives you an opportunity to work on those things.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And the theme that I think rang out from all three responses were you get a chance to handle responsibility, whether it's for your patients, with the new increased caseload that you're given, as well as responsibility for yourself, knowing how to set boundaries and to also prioritize to make sure that you're getting everything done that you need to. Okay, thank you so much. I think we have a question here from Samira in our audience. She's asking, what advice do you have for applicants this year so that they can stand out? As you know, with COVID, residency applications this year is a bit different. There's no more like visiting rotations, and I think everything in terms of interviews are virtual. So I don't know if Dr. Nair, as the program director at Georgetown, if you'd like to tackle this question first.
Yeah, I think that's a very difficult question because we're trying to figure that out ourselves as to how best to evaluate candidates. I think, honestly, though, it's important to remember that every applicant is in the same boat you're in. So you're not alone in this. Everyone is in the same sort of situation about worries about not having done an external rotation in other places and things along those lines. I think one of the things that has been brought on by neurosurgery is the need for a general surgery letter or a letter from a non-neurosurgeon, which in years past was not something that was needed or even really used. And I think getting a strong letter from someone outside the field can certainly help demonstrate your sort of clinical skill and your interest in neurosurgery by them talking about your passion for the field, even though they're speaking about you in another field. So a general surgery letter that speaks about your passion could certainly help you stand out. And I think in the end, it's going to come down to, since we aren't really going to have as much in-person time with you, it's the things you provide that are personal. So your personal statement, things like that are useful for people to get a better picture of what you're like, are going to be really useful and important for us this year. But I think in the end, everyone is going to be in the same boat. So it's difficult for there to be one particular thing for everyone to do that will make them stand out. I think being yourself and being genuine, I think the keys, and I will say this just in general, the key to neurosurgery is not intelligence. It's not a lot of things that people think you need, like hand-eye coordination. The key determining factor that programs want to see is a true, genuine interest in the neurosciences, clinical neurosciences, and in surgery. They want to know that you love that field, that it's not anything but true, genuine love of neurosurgery that's bringing you into the field. And if you can demonstrate that in an essay or in your interviews, I think that's going to go a long way to programs feeling comfortable with you and ranking you highly.
Sorry, thank you, Dr. Nair. And just to reiterate that key component, just having a general, genuine interest in neurosciences and surgery, and having that come across in our interview responses as well as our essays will go a long way in making us stand out for these different programs. Next, we have a question from Alexis. Says, given neurosurgery is now the number one research intensive specialty, how do you go about navigating research with such limited time schedules? I think. Any of the residents or Dr. McGowan would be willing to?
Sure, I can jump on that one. As a medical student, and sort of dovetailing on what Dr. Nair just said, expressing and showing and demonstrating an interest in neurosurgery is going to be crucial, especially during this application cycle. One of the things you can do to show your home institution, which you will now have a competitive advantage at, is to say, I'm going to get in touch with the residents there. I'm going to get in touch and find out when the conferences are. I'm going to find out when they do film rounds, whatever the case may be. And that's sort of when you can find your way into projects. So being around neurosurgery is how you can further your sort of footprint in the field. So for example, Islam, who is now a 6-year resident at Georgetown and now has some pretty steep responsibilities in terms of patient care and operative development, is also still completing research from his research here at the NIH, wherever the case may be. If you show that you can help him in a meaningful way and say, I'm interested in this project, what can I do? Not only does that help you demonstrate your commitment to neurosurgery and give you a research project to work on, it also helps Islam, who has quite a heavy workload, to also keep moving his projects forward. So one of the biggest piece of advice is to sort of figure out what the normal neurosurgical week looks like. When is the academic day at your home institution? Find a resident, either someone that you know through rotations, or just send out an email if you hear someone speak during a conference and say, I'm interested in working with this project, how can I be of help? And that's a way to get onto an initial project. And I will tell you from experience, those medical students that excel and sort of meet deadlines or sort of pushing the project forward will then be tapped to do next projects, because in neurosurgery we value efficiency almost as paramount. So that would be my advice with respect to that.
Thank you, Dr. McGowan. Does anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I can chime in too. I mean, I agree completely. I think the biggest part of doing research is that it's just a big part of showing your interest in the field. And the way to do that is, like Jason was saying, just either be present so that when residents who have less time to work on research are looking for someone help, they can see you there at the conference and just explain some projects that you can get involved in. Or just email the residents, or by word of mouth. You can get involved in projects. And I think the question mentioned that sometimes the medical student schedule is very busy, and that's fine. I think that involvement in these projects doesn't have to be extensive. It doesn't have to be dedicated research time. It could be simply just doing some data mining on a couple of spare weekends. But if you do that work efficiently and do it well, I think the residents and the faculty see that, and you'll get involved in more and more projects. And like I said, that's a solid way to show your interest in the field and make your CV look better.
Thank you, Dr. McGowan.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dr. Paul.
Yeah, I would echo everything that everyone has said. One of the key pieces being mentorship is just sort of align yourself with somebody's vision, and a vision that you're personally interested in. I think the worst thing that people can do is to just do research for research's sake. So, the best advice I got was to find a project that you believe in, that you're passionate about, and that your belief in that project or your belief in the science or whatever the outcome would be is going to drive you and motivate you to be efficient when you're tired. Otherwise it's going to be really difficult to stay on track. And so, I would say, research is great, but I would make sure that you do research that interests you. And if you have no interest in it, then maybe move on to something else that's going to be a little bit more efficient for your time. And that's going to show that passion on your application.
Okay. Thank you to all our panelists for responding. So, Alexis, I believe it's availability, always being present, and showing initiative and your passion that way. From Kennedy, we have going off what Dr. Neer said about not being dissuaded by unwelcoming mentors. I sometimes worry about entering such a white, male-dominated field as a biracial Black woman. How do you all find community and cope with the lack of representation in neurosurgery?
I guess I'm the only girl here. I can speak a bit about being like the only girl most of the time, and then you'll probably be maybe the only minority in your department. It just depends on where you are and what part of the country you find yourself in. I think that kind of regardless of that, you'll find people that you gel with and that you have similar interests in. My rotations were in Chicago and New York, and then this was my last external rotation in Shreveport. And I had women mentors that tell me, avoid the South at all costs, because it'll be racist and sexist. And you really have to kind of take each place as it comes and evaluate for yourself and have things that you're looking for. Some people say, oh, look for programs where there are women there, look for programs where there are already people of color. And so you kind of can see how you might fare. I think one thing is like to look for programs where everybody's not the same. And that was one thing for me, that even it kind of irrespective of like their race, gender, where they kind of all the same people, then I knew that I probably didn't want to be there. Until this year, I was the only Black person in my program. There would have been Black people previously, but me and my co-residents are extremely close. I mean, we just gel as people. And then there's always other groups, there's all these extramural groups, there's Facebook groups, there's a lot of different groups and stuff that you could find people that do have those common interests that, maybe sometimes you need to talk to them about this or that, but you still should be able, I think at most places or a lot of places, to find quote unquote your people, people who you gel with.
Thank you, Dr. Terrell. Anyone else would like to chime in or? Okay, sorry. Dr. Fahid?
Yeah, I think I agree completely, obviously, but I think another main point is that neurosurgery as a whole is a very small field. So the sense of community among neurosurgeons is pretty strong. So obviously there are gender and race issues, and we know that given the current kind of national climate. But neurosurgery in and of itself is so small that you find these connections very easily within the field, and that gives you a sense of feeling at home, and regardless of what background you've come from.
Okay. Thank you both for responding. Do we have more questions from the chat? Okay, so Alexander is asking, do you suggest doing a research year before applying? If so, what should that research year look like?
I think I can answer because I did take out time from medical school to do research. And I would kind of go back to my original comment on I wouldn't do it just to do it, to beef up your CV. It's something that you really have to be passionate and enjoy, because taking a full year out is not a small undertaking. And so, I would make sure that, it's a project that, like I said, you identify with, but that you also have a game plan for success. And one of the things that, I encourage people coming behind me is to have a backup plan. And, one of the things that you would hate to happen is to spend an entire year, which is, when you think about research, it's actually a really short time, and not have something to show for it. The currency of research is a publication. And if you come out of that year without a publication, well, you may have worked very hard and everyone has seen that you've worked hard. When you go on the interview trail and you don't have any publications or conference abstracts to show for it, it's going to be hard to justify that you weren't sitting around twiddling your thumbs and just having fun for a year. So one of the things that our school offered, and I'm not sure how it works at other institutions, is that you could pair a research year with something like the master's. And so actually my research year got extended into 2, but I paired it with a master's in neurobiology and anatomy as a backup plan, so that, in case the project that I was working on wasn't able to be published, then I had at least a piece of paper that said I was in a classroom doing something, that I learned something during that time. Those are just kind of things to take into consideration, is make sure you have some type of backup plan, and then, plan out the year accordingly, and do it because you really are invested in the project, not because you want to boost your CV.
Thank you, Dr. Paul. Did anyone else take a research year during their training?
I took a research year, and I did it. A lot of it was to help me make a decision. But I think Dr. Paul's point about having a backup plan I think that it's a well taken point. And I would also echo his point that a lot of people do their research year between their 3rd and their 4th year, realizing that you start your research year, and then, it's not that much time till you need to start doing rotations again. So it's not always a shoo-in that you're going to get a publication in that period of time. So I've always advocated for students to do a research year for exactly what Dr. Paul said, because you're interested, because you want to do it, because it's something you love to do it and you feel a passion towards it. I wouldn't do it just to do it because you feel like everyone's doing it, because honestly, most candidates don't do a full research year. But like Dr. McGowan and Dr. Fayed were saying, doing research, clinical projects while you're still on rotations, doing as best you can to demonstrate that you're interested, that you can handle and manage and juggle these responsibilities, goes a long way to helping your application.
Thank you both so much for responding. So Kennedy, it's a matter of making sure that you have passion for a project, and hopefully at the end of that time, you have something tangible to show for your efforts for taking that time off. We have another question. What advice would you give to medical students applying without a home program?
So I can speak to that a little bit just because I'm a PD as well as a clerkship director. So every student, even if you don't have a home program, the way the system has been sort of written for this year is you should be able to access the closest neurosurgery program to do a rotation at that program. So for people who are applying right now, you should be able to access the rotation at another institution, even though that's not allowed except for situations like this. For students who are first, second years, who are further away from this but want to get involved in neurosurgery, I would seek out residents and professors and fellow faculty at that next closest institution. And this is actually a very good year to start participating in as many of those Zoom conferences that programs are having to get your name, get your face out there, and sort of confirm your interest in the field. And I think you'll find that those Zoom conferences aren't just going to go away. I think a lot of programs find them very useful, and they're here for the long run. So I think you can participate virtually, and I would advocate for that.
Thank you, Dr. Neer. For Dr. McGowan, since you did a fellowship, I believe, did you do a spine fellowship? I know a lot of people do not know about neurosurgery subspecialty. Can you tell us about the subspecialty that you trained in and what made you further subspecialize?
Sure. So after I completed residency at Georgetown, I went to the University of Pittsburgh, UPMC, for a complex spinal deformity, spinal reconstruction fellowship with Drs. Cantor, Okonkwo, and Hamilton. I think that there's sort of a global way to look at this and then sort of a individual specific way to answer that question. As you look at the healthcare landscape, the idea of the generalist is something that I think is fading. And it is my experience that hospitals and universities and even private practices are now moving towards board certified, fellowship trained neurosurgeons in specific subspecialties so that they can tell their patients, they can tell the catchment area that they serve. We have a sorry, every time I say a word, Siri pops up. But they want to know that you've gone that extra mile, that you've seen the cases that may be rarer, that you, I don't know how to turn that off, that you see the complications that come along with some of these larger surgeries, and that you, most importantly, understand how to get a patient from the clinic to the operating room and do the right procedure. So I did a subspecialty in complex spinal deformity, and that complemented my training at Georgetown, where we have a large emphasis on minimally invasive circumferential spine surgery. So A-lifts, T-lifts, MIS T-lifts, laterals. We do a significant volume of that, but we don't necessarily do a ton of the corrective deformity, at least by the time I graduated. I know they're now we're moving into that realm there at Georgetown, and I like to say we because I feel like I'm still part of the family. But for me, it was nice to know that going out to a level 1 trauma center at the base of all the ski resorts in Denver, Colorado, and knowing that I don't really have any backup with respect to another physician that does complex spinal deformity in my group. It's sort of, if the patient comes in, do you know what to do and can you technically execute that? And the second caveat goes back to the initial question that I don't think I answered fully, and that's maintaining your mentorship. So in my first year of practice, which I completed in September of this year, I did 140 cases, and I would sort of say anecdotally, I probably reached out to mentors that have gotten me to where I am on at least 45 of those cases. Dr. Nair is one of the people that's sort of really high in my text log because he also trained in complex spinal deformity and does MIS. So it's nice to be able to say, hey, this is the patient, this is what I've done for the workup if it's elective. These are the two sort of decisions. This is the fork in the road where I'm sitting right now. Potentially I would go this way for reasons X, Y, and Z. Potentially I would go this way for reasons A, B, and C. What's your thought? What's your opinion? And it's very comforting to hear someone who has far more experience than you do say either A, I agree with what your plan is, or B, I would look at it differently. I would do this because of, the circumstances. And that allows you to go into the operating room, first off to the patient room with confidence and say, this is the plan we're going to do. And then secondly, go into the operating room and complete the surgery successfully. So do you need a fellowship? Depending on what you're doing, no. As Dr. Paul said, he's doing an enfolded fellowship. I think that when you have residencies that are 7 years in length, that is a great option. But an external fellowship in places where you don't do enfolded fellowships like Georgetown, where we sort of protect the residents and the residents get all the dibs, not even first dibs. Doing an extramural fellowship can really add to your training and then provide you the confidence. And most importantly, I'd say I learned a majority of my complex spinal deformity knowledge came from the clinic space. In the OR, you probably need about 50 to 60 cases and you're like, okay, I think I got this. But it's really spending time in the clinic, which isn't always prioritized when you're a resident, where you figure out how do I identify the patients that I can help? How do I identify the patients that I can't help but someone else can? How do I identify the patients that I can't help and I'm not sure anybody can?
Thank you so much for sharing, Dr. McGowan. I believe we're at the 1 to 2 questions left for the time that we have allotted. I believe we'll ask, another question from our audience. Samira is asking, what is one of the biggest misconceptions about neurosurgery?
I think, one of the things that I think I thought, and maybe a lot of people, because even my friends who graduated med school with me who are in other things, they think that you're just so smart and that you just have to be so smart to do neurosurgery and that you couldn't possibly do it because I'm not that smart. And I think Dr. Nair mentioned this before, it really doesn't take, this excessive above average level of intelligence. It does just take more like dedication to working hard and to being thorough and being detail oriented. But I think that's a misconception, is that I'm not smart enough to be a neurosurgeon. A lot of med students feel that way, or neurosurgery is above my head or out of my depth. And I really wish that was one thing that people didn't think, because it's a great field. I think it's very rewarding and you can have a long, great career. And I think a lot of people would enjoy it if they would just kind of put that barrier to the side.
Thank you, Dr. Terrell.
Along those lines and briefly, I think the other misconception in neurosurgery, or sort of the other end of that conversation, I think is the biggest thing about neurosurgery is getting up the next day, right? So especially when you're a junior resident, you are going to get beat down on days, and it's neurosurgery demands excellence, but we know when you come in there, you are not a mid-level or senior level resident. That's the purpose of residency. So the best residents are the ones that get right back up the next day and they bring it, harder. And, one mistake is fine, but the same mistake twice rarely happens. And I think that's what makes a standout resident, as opposed to just saying, I read books, I memorize facts. It's sort of being able to internalize, grow, and then come back the next day knowing you're going to get another beating.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. Our last question from the audience is from Amunda Mancho. She's asking, what is the most important factor in choosing places to apply for residency aside from location? And what are some of the specific strengths of your respective training program to residency?
I'll jump in again here. I think when you're looking for places for residency, I think it's a similar goal as for med school. You want to go to a residency where you're going to come out being able to do what you want to do. Not just barely make it out, but be able to go there and thrive and then have whatever options you want to have for your career and your life when you get out. For lack of a better word, I was looking for vibes when I went on my interviews. If the place didn't vibe well, I was like, it's out. I also had some objective things that I wrote down at the time of interview. And especially if you guys are all doing this all on Zoom, it's all going to run together at the end when you're making your rank list. So the things that are important to you, is there support there for research? Are there people of color there? Are there people there that I could identify as a mentor? Whatever those things are, write them down at the outset and then write down whatever you come across as you're going through the interview process. And at the end of the day, when you match up your list to what you saw at those places, if those things don't match, then no matter what their name is and how much their book fund is and whatever else perks they may have, don't pick a place based off the perks and how new the neuro ICU is and this and that and the other. It needs to fit with who you feel you are in a place that you think that you'll thrive.
Thank you, Dr. Terrell. Anyone have any other pearls to add to that? Dr. Moore?
My piece of advice is that you should apply broadly to a lot of places at all sorts of different tiers of programs, knowing that you're going to get great training wherever you go in terms of cases and things like that. There's not that many neurosurgery programs. You're going to come out able to operate, virtually all of them. So I think broadly apply and broadly interview, with the idea that you're going to interview at a lot of places that you don't particularly like, but that's still a positive. You can still pull positive from that, because if you interview at a place you don't like, you're going to be able to see the things you don't like, and you'll realize slowly what it is you are looking for, so that at the end of the day, when you are coming up with your match list, you can much more clearly decide, okay, these are the programs I want to go to because they are very high in the things I like and they're very low in the things I've learned I don't like. So apply broadly, because there is some math to this. When you look at the AAMC, there's a certain number of programs that when you interview, I think it's 15 or 16. If you can interview at 15 or 16 programs, your rate of matching sort of plateaus. So the only way to get 15 or 16 interviews is to apply broadly.
Thank you, both Dr. Nair and Dr. Terrell. Lastly, we'll have you guys just share a one-liner that you would, word of advice that you'd give to for the students that's following behind you. So a one-liner, word of advice. We'll start with Dr. McGowan.
Okay. So I think that the best thing that you can do to set yourself up is to go into this with an open mind. As Dr. Paul said, if you're saying I wanted to be a neurosurgeon since the age of 2, but you don't give anything else another chance, I do think that you have to be certain that this is what you want to do, because if you find yourself in a long training program and you aren't happy, you're not going to have a positive outcome. So be very open and sort of make sure that this is what you want to do, and then pursue it with all your heart.
Thank you. Dr. Fayed.
Sure. I'd say I think the two biggest factors going into a successful student or resident or going on are passion and work ethic. I think if you go in and work hard every day, show your work ethic, that goes miles. But at the same time, it's easy to get bogged down in the day-to-day of residency or med school. So try to remember what makes you passionate about the field. And if you bring that passion to work every day, not only does it keep you going, but it excites the people around you as well, and makes for a really good work environment and sets you up for
Dr.
success.
Paul?
I think I'm going to repeat one that Dr. McGowan said, if after a beatdown, show up the next day. But honestly, I think that integrity, character, and hard work are the most important, especially in neurosurgery. Just your integrity is key. We're working with sick patients, and you have to pay attention to the details, and you have to show up every day, being the best person that you can be.
Dr. Terrell?
One quote that I think that gives me a lot of strength throughout these junior years is that courage is not the absence of fear, it's the conquest of it. I think with neurosurgery residency, especially, it's a long time. You get presented with so many things that you feel like, oh my gosh, can I do this? There's so many horizons that you overcome in the course of your residency, and just know that you can do all of it because it's all been done before. And as you encounter things, you'll develop the skills or gain the skills to deal with it.
Thank you. And lastly, Dr. Nair.
Yeah, I think a lot of what I would say has already been said, but I think it's important to go into the field realizing that you're going to make mistakes. You have people's lives in your hands, and you're going to make a mistake that leads to someone's death at some point in your career. And you have to go in knowing that that's going to happen, and you're going to have to learn from every single mistake you can possibly learn from in a way so that you can avoid it in the future. But there's no way of avoiding the fact that you will make mistakes, and it's part of the field.
Okay, thank you so much. At this time, I want to thank our wonderful panelists for sharing their experiences and wisdom with us. You guys have given us a lot of pearls that we can impact in our everyday lives, as well as we're going through third and fourth year and figuring out what it is that we want to do in medicine. So thank you so much for taking the time to share with us this evening. We appreciate your support of SNMA and of our membership. And for those of you in the audience who are no longer member or who are not members, we ask that you go ahead and sign up at www.snma.org. And we also have a QR code that will be on the screen. We ask that you scan this code, or also there will be a link in the comment section where you could just give us feedback so we'll know how it is that we can better improve our Sowing Seeds specialty series in the future. Again, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We encourage you to follow us on all social media platforms, on Instagram at SNMA_official, on Twitter at SNMA, and like us on Facebook. And again, if you're not a member of the national body, we ask you to visit snma.org to sign up and get connected. Thank you so much for tuning in. Unfortunately, this is our last specialty webinar for the semester, but if you've missed any of our webinars, they are recorded, so please check them out on our IGTV or Facebook page. Thank you again for joining us this evening. Have a good night.